Hello, welcome back to my channel. I have a bit of, tuft of hair over here. That's a bit wild. But anyway, hi, welcome back. It's time to talk about books. I finished 2 books, like I mentioned in the last video, and these 2 books I would say are quite interesting and also fun. I can't wait to talk about them. So here they are. By the way, I do have a bit of cold right now, so I sniffle a little bit, I may cough, my voice may sound a little bit different than usual, because, yeah, I have a bit of a cold. It has been raining, like, every day here in Kuching. Like, it's insane. Like, yesterday, it had been raining for the whole day, and I think today it had been raining for the whole day as well. Like, only now it's starting to chill a little bit, like the rain has stopped, or maybe it is still raining, I don't know, but in general it's a little bit cold here. I mean, as cold as how it can get in a tropical climate area. But anyway, let's talk about books. So the first one I want to talk about is this one. This is called Pedro Páramo by Juan Rulfo. This was a book that I first heard of when I just started booktubing. So before that, I didn't know anything about Pedro Páramo. And the first time I heard about this book was from Juan Jose's channel. At that time, his channel was called The Bookish Islander, and I think now he also has a Spanish language channel, also Bookish channel. So I will have the links for both in the description box. But yeah, the first time I heard about this book, I was really intrigued, because apparently this book is like a modern classic. It is quite well known, but obviously at that time I didn't know anything about it. But I thought it was really interesting. That was like around 2021. And so I got this book. I told my sister, I was interested in this book, and she wanted to give me a, Christmas present, and I was like, okay, here's my wish list, and she got me this. So I was really excited at the time. But when I read this book, the first time I read it, it was so difficult to get into this book. I don't know why. It was just so difficult to get into the story. But this time around, the second time I tried this book, it was okay. Like, yeah, this book was kind of dizzying, but it was okay. Like, it suddenly felt accessible. Like, I don't know what happened. Is it age? Anyway, this one was originally written in Spanish. It was translated to English by Margaret Peden, and Pedro Páramo is about, it is a story that follows a man named Juan Preciado, who goes to a town called Comala because his dying mom asked him to. So basically he goes to Comala as per the advice of his mom in order to know more about his absent father, Pedro Páramo. The story takes place in Mexico. The writer was Mexican, and basically what happens is that when Juan Preciado reaches Comala, he finds out that Comala is actually a ghost town. Emphasis on ghost. And things just got really wild from there. But the point is that this novel tells us what really happened in Comala. Like, what were the major things that happened in Comala with Pedro Páramo as the central figure. Now, apparently Pedro Páramo, this guy, was like this really important person in this small town. Generally, people in that town knew him, but what is up with this guy that made him such a notorious figure in this town? And this book pretty much tells us that Pedro Páramo is going to be an interesting figure. and how is he like, what exactly is his deal? Like, why did the mom want Juan Preciado to go to that town and get, get to know the history of his father? Okay, and the way that the story unfolds in this book just felt so, like I said, it felt so disorienting for me. It's kind of dizzying because of a few reasons. One is because the story does not take the form of a linear structure. Like, time in here just goes back and forth between the past and also the present. And it just jumps around. Not only that, it also jumps around between different perspectives. So at the beginning, we would have the perspective of Juan Preciado, our point of view character. But then, in other sections of the book, suddenly the perspective would shift, and we would look at the story of the people who live in Comala, who lived in Comala. And it's just so interesting because the way that the story of Comala, the history of it, the history of the people who live there, just sort of gets dripped into us in a way that is gradual, but also not info dumpy. And as we move along the story, we start to get to know a little bit more about what the hell happened in Comala. Okay, that expletive was intentional because hell is like so relevant for this book. Just saying. And we start to know more about why is Pedro Páramo so important, like what kind of a person he is, and we start to learn more about how certain subject matters, how certain themes become like central to the story. Things such as violence, or power dynamics between different people in a society. How that just kind of like just how the dynamics just sort of influence social cohesion. And how the whole thing just sort of contributes to kind of like the welfare of an entire society. Like, there's so much to unpack in this book. I feel like when I was reading this, my first read was like, and I really read it one time. I might reread it in the future, but my first read of this book was. It was quite similar to like how you're like digging into something, and then but because you don't really know how to dig, like you don't really have the great techniques of digging, and so you didn't really know like where are the places that you should dig. But at the same time, when you do dig, you find out that there are so many interesting things that you find as you dig, like so many shiny stuff, like fun stuff that you dig. But you also know that because of your kind of like lack of technique of digging, and so you know that there are probably so many interesting things still uncovered, still left uncovered. So that's my impression when I read this book. I feel like maybe later on, upon rereading, I may get I may see something new with this book. So yeah, that's my impression of it. Maybe that's why when the first time I tried reading this book like a few years ago, I just couldn't get into it because it was like so confusing. For some reason, it was just so confusing. But this time, it was so good. Yeah, try this book if you haven't done so. I give this one 5 out of 5 stars. Now, moving on to the second one, this is by Julie Otsuka. This is called When the Emperor Was Divine. Now, this book was published in 2002. And this would be my second book by Julie Otsuka. The first one that I read was The Swimmers. and I enjoyed that one. I thought that it had a really interesting style. The author obviously played around with perspectives, point of views. It was interesting, and I found that in this book, this was actually the author's debut, I believe, and there is also a lot of like playing around with perspective and point of views as well. Like, it is experimental to some extent, and definitely it feels very similar, like the wavelength that I felt when I read The Swimmers was definitely something that I got from this book as well. So that is like one of the things that I really like when I read. If the author really has a really strong authorial voice, that you could really feel like, yes, this is the author speaking, and not just some random author just using like perfectly crafted words to tell a story. Like, I read this and I know it's the author. Anyway, so this book is about Japanese internment camp in the U.S. that happened sometime in the 40s, and it centers around a family, and this family consists of a mom and two kids, one boy and a girl. And basically what happens is that the family has been ordered to go to this internment camp. They originally live in Berkeley, and they're ordered to go to this camp somewhere in Utah. And it sort of chronicles their experience, starting when they are just kind of like getting ready to go there, and what they do to prepare to go there, what they do at their home, and then what were their experiences when they are on the train, what their experiences are when they are actually at the internment camp, and later, after they are being released from the camp and they return to their former life, and how their life looks like after the camp. So it's kind of like a story that kind of like encompasses the entire experience from the beginning all the way to the end, with the camp, with the internment camp in the middle. And this family, their father has been arrested actually much earlier, before the story starts, and the father has been sent to a totally different camp, and so this family has not seen their father for a long time now, and that becomes like an important plot point in this book as well. And basically, I think that this book tells the story of this family in a way that feels really effective. Basically, the focus that the book chooses to use is actually on the domesticity of this family. Now, throughout this book, this family kind of remains nameless. If I remember correctly, I do not recall seeing the names associated with this family. Like, I don't know what's the name of the mom and the boy and the girl. They remain being referred to as the mother, the brother or the sister and all that. So the choice of making these characters remain nameless feels very interesting, and I feel like there's so much to talk about, like why they remain nameless. And I just felt that that's just really fascinating. And yeah, back to how this book is kind of like focusing mostly on domesticity. Right at the beginning, we're seeing like how the house that this family lives in looks like, and what the mom does in order to prepare for going to this camp. And at the beginning, it felt like, it was just like a normal day, like this mom goes to the shop and then she returns to the house and all that. But when upon her return to that house, while waiting for the kids from school, this mom would do certain things like packing up. Okay, packing up is normal, but then she starts to do certain things that feels kind of strange. And the things that she does, which includes like taking down pictures and all that, and dealing with certain animals at their home without giving too much spoilers. Okay, suddenly it felt kind of sinister, and I felt that it really, it effectively establishes the tone of how this book is going to move on forward. Like, this is, we are being introduced to characters living in such in a life that sort of resembles something very normal, but suddenly something becomes, it starts to become like kind of off kilter and strange and sinister, and it slowly dawns on us like what's really going to happen to these characters. And because it is also partly historical fiction, we know sort of like how things would happen to this family, but you can't help but feel that there's this sense of dread just kind of like floating in the background as the story progresses. But still, the focus remains on the domestic part of this family life, like the relationship with each other, and kind of stuff that they eat, for example, all these kinds of things. And so I would say this focus like really humanizes these characters, and it sort of feels like an interesting contrast to what really happens on a bigger scale, like how this family is being sent to an internment camp alongside other Japanese Americans, and so and therefore the dehumanization that happens when they're being sent to the internment camp. And so there's this kind of like contrast between humanization and dehumanization that sort of like they would kind of like fight each other in this book. So there's this like constant struggle between the two. I thought really interesting. And just to add one more thing is that in the last video I mentioned that I read Rue by Ozu by Kim Thúy, and I felt that it had this kind of like same, or not same, but kind of like similar spirit in terms of a story that is about making certain groups of people feeling dehumanized, or stories that involve operations that would include dehumanization of certain groups of people. This theme certainly happens in both of these books. I thought it's kind of interesting that I'm reading, that I read these two books like so close to each other, and it felt like they are in conversation with one another. I thought that this book was really interesting, and also on the style. This book is kind of like divided into a few sections, and all of these sections, they can sort of work as standalone short stories. Like if you just read them, as by themselves, you could still get them. But they sort of work with each other. Like there is a cohesion that happens between these stories that I thought is kind of interesting as well. And again, the author certainly plays around with point of view. Like at least one of the stories uses this plural first-person point of view, which I thought is kind of interesting also. Anyway, this is a nice book, and I am glad to have read this one. I am definitely interested in reading more by Julie Otsuka. In fact, I was interested in reading one of her books before, and I kind of ordered that book, but suddenly when I wanted to press checkout, the book was gone. Someone else had already bought it, so it's like kind of disappointing, but next time. Anyway, those are all of the books that I'm reading at this moment. For the next 2 months, I'll be going to a new place, and so that is going to present a little bit of I mean, it's not really a big deal, but at least, you know, like how I have like a bunch of books in my currently reading shelf right now. Like I think I have at least 16 books that I'm currently reading, but I am not going to bring all of those 16 books to this new place that I'll be in for, you know, for the next 2 months, because I want to travel lightly, and 16 books are really heavy, and I will be like bringing with me only lighter books. So some of these books are only going to be like, I will only resume reading some of these books after I get back, which is like in April or so. And so that means, I don't know, for books such as The New Wilderness, looks like I'm going to delay reading that book. But yeah, I'm still gonna like, I'm still thinking about what books I want to bring to this new place. But anyway, yeah. And also on the topic of currently reading books, I feel like lately I've been reading a lot of books that have so much to do with like violence among people, and it's kind of sad. But at the same time, there's also kind of like the kinds of books I usually read. Like even in this video, I'm talking about Pedro Páramo, and I'm reading When the Emperor Was Divine. Last book was about, you know, people being uprooted. A lot of like heavy stuff lately, and I don't know, sometimes it does feel like, oh my gosh, why am I reading all of these really heavy things? But, you know, at the same time, it feels kind of rewarding as well. But yeah, I don't know, for some reason I always get back to these kinds of books, but it just feels so obvious, like lately, the kinds of books I've been reading. And also I'm reading The Bridge Over the Drina by Andrić right now. If you don't know that book, it is a novel about, it's a historical novel about a bridge in Bosnia-Herzegovina, in the town of Visegrad, and basically it's kind of like a chronicle of what happens in like the 400 years after the bridge has been built, like what has been happening around it. So you could expect stuff like war, people doing bad things to each other, kinds of stuff. It's heavy, but oh my gosh, I love that book. I love that book. I mean, I'm loving it so far. So I can't wait to finish that book. And yeah, maybe you'll see it in a future recent read. So until then, take care. Let me know if you have read the books I've talked about in this video. Let me know if you have read Pedro Páramo or Julie Otsuka books. What do you think about these books? Do you like them? Do you hate them? Do you feel about them? Yeah. So until then, take care. Thanks for watching, and bye.